don't have to get through the whole thing. I don't have to, because it's hard to just stand here and read to people. It's stupid too. So what I want to do though is I want us to edit this piece of writing together. And I want you to ask questions and make suggestions and criticize the language if you want. We have one of the translators is sitting here. We can hang him up to dry. And Mark. And so that this is going to be an interactive situation on my part, and truly interactive if you interact with me. So, that's the plan. Have you read it? You don't have it? Who has, are there any copies left of this? Yeah. They ran out. Do you have an English version? I think it could possibly be put on the net for people to read afterwards. Anyway, I'm going to read it to you, so. There is such a thing as the dance world. It exists as a consensus among those who practice the various arts of dancing, a people very concerned with how the pedestrian body is transformed into a medium of art. I think it is so weird to turn human beings into a medium. Just for starters, what are we doing as dancers? What does it mean to go from being a body into being a body, It's an interesting idea. The dance world is a population that develops toes of steel, hips that are super flexible, spines that bend like willows, muscles that can contract and extend beyond normal endurance because the circulation of oxygenated blood is swift and thorough, bodies that may leap and fly or fall to ground in mechanically safe and complex ways. This is all based in the activity of projection or extension. This is my thesis of the day. This is something that strikes me as so simple and so amazing, but Western dancing is based on the same idea as when you point at a sailboat. Or if you reach for a beer, that's what Western dancing is based on, except we do it with the whole body. And it doesn't appear to me from my what I've seen of dance around the world that this idea exists anywhere else. I don't see it. I see high kicks, in martial arts. I see, but I don't see any place where this idea of, the stretch in all directions away from the pelvis happens. A little bow to that idea. In addition to expanding the possibilities of movement and creating a clear semaphore of gestures for theatrical purposes, I think the projection results in a socially desirable carriage of the body. It is a wondrous invention, firmly based in ballet technique, somewhat modified in the subsequent modern dance varieties. And this is a unique development to the West, which has caused a classical movement tradition as interesting and developed as the classic dance or theater developments in other cultures, by which I mean such as kabuki or katakali or Balinese or Japanese dance or any long-term, almost lost in the mists of history kind of movement or theater tradition. I think our dance tradition has that kind of quality, and in ballet, of course, they try to keep it classical, which means as the source developed the idea, so we still have that around as well. The dance world derives from and exists to maintain its traditions. So that's a kind of circular sentence. The dance world comes from and at the same time exists to further the idea of this projection as the kind of movement that we call dance. So we call it dance because that's what it was called when we learned it, and we will call it dance, and then our students will call it dance, and that's what dance will be. It isn't what dance is at all. It isn't all it is, but it's pretty much the way that dance is thought in Europe, and therefore in America, and therefore every place that these two continents have influenced. So long as the expenses of ballet can be covered, all is well. As long as ballet can remind the donors that it was created in royal courts of Europe, as long as the tradition of rigorous schools and expensive productions can be maintained, as long as the word gala can be used to entice the tuxedoed and begowned and jewel-encrusted patrons to attend performances, ballet, along with the opera and the grandest of the art museums, will continue to flourish. But what of the dancers? It is said that it takes 10 years to make the legs of a dancer. That number suggests that if a dancer is to debut on stage in their late teens, they should have begun classes at the age of 8 years. The technique classes and their long duration achieve many things besides legs. No one can speak of how long it takes to develop the mind of a dancer. But clearly, the brain itself must be enabled. In fact, I use the word enabled. I mean changed. I mean, the brain must grow new structures and to quickly learn movement combinations, a skill the normal person may rarely have to do. And I'm curious about that learning. What does it mean to be able to dance for hours doing someone else's movement? it's like a kind of vampirism, isn't it? It's like, I just think it's interesting. I think it's odd that we actually learn to not do our own movement for hours. That we can spend hours outside our movement self and in somebody else's movement self. Well, because in the dance world, most movement comes from the teacher or the choreographer. And of course, this is not different than music, some sports, the martial arts, and in general, you may have heard that mastery requires 10,000 hours of practice. This is a figure that's popular to quote now to students of any kind. You know, just keep going for 10,000 hours and all will be well. 10,000 hours, oh my God, of classes, 10,000 hours of tendus. Oh. I mean, I think the tendu is the basis of that 10 years of leg development. You know, I think it's a fantastic invention. But really, 10,000 hours. So what I'm saying is that a kind of, devotion, maybe passivity of spirit is required to do that. Maybe that's true for all the arts. And writing, probably, and, you know, auto mechanics, I mean, I don't know. But, yes, a question, yes.
No, I just wanted to say, I think that if you're an artist, right, first you have to know
The craft.
And then you can, like...
If you're an artist, first you have to know the craft.
It's not like craft.
I know some who have, I know a woman who's around 80 right now who never learned the craft of dancing. She made it up.
Yeah, but she has her own craft, right?
But that's not the craft. It's slightly different than what you were saying.
I also don't say...
Okay, so then we agree. So then, one, you have the craft that the dance world gives you to learn, which is invaluable. I learned that. I went that way. But it is possible, if you're willing to be considered strange, and willing, you know, you have enough character to sustain that for your life, which my friend did. I'm talking about Simone Forti. Do you know her? Do you know this name? She is currently, as I said, around 80 years old. She is currently having a big exhibition in Germany, or will soon in the spring. And I think that speaks for itself. She was unable, I'll tell you the story, she was unable to manage dance classes. I saw her in Cunningham classes. She couldn't accept that Cunningham would say, okay, raise your right arm, and he would go like this, and we would all go like this. So everybody was raising the arm of the same side. She couldn't accept that he raised his left arm. And she couldn't accept that when she looked into a mirror, the mirror apparently raised its left arm. Her image, her very image, is reversed left to right. So you raise your right arm to the mirror, and the mirror raises its right arm. She couldn't accept that. And furthermore, she told me, when she told me that story, she said, and I don't understand why the mirror does not reverse things up to down. And if it did, can you imagine how we would be dancing these days? At any rate, it's possible. This is really an issue because I want to push the idea of self-initiative in the arts. At the same time, I'm worried for people who follow my advice because I think it is, what I'm afraid of is passivity in the arts. What I'm afraid of is people who learn the craft or take 10,000 hours or 10 years to learn the craft and lose their initiative and become clones, carbon copies in the arts, as opposed to moving onwards. So it's a problematic area, and it's that problem in a way that I'm addressing in this. Perhaps 90% of employed dancers dance in the chorus, the ensemble. It can be seen that of the many who study, only a tiny percent get to achieve solo status or perhaps stardom. Once I regarded this as a harsh reality, but let us remember that of the many who don't get that far, at least in study, the benefits of dance in terms of higher physical system are given. And I don't mean that just as a crumb to the people who study dance and then don't take it that seriously and stop or whatever. I think it really does give the body a very strong craft, let's say, in terms of dealing with gravity, which the body will be doing forever, as long as it lives. And gravity, as we know, turns people from the extended days of youth into the crumpled and slow, feeble days of old age. That's gravity. And it can be worked against. So that's what dance gives, and I don't think the value of that, I think the value of that is higher, really, than just getting to dance in performances. And what of those students who rebel or are unable to achieve the brain which can assume the movement of another person? It is not the business of the dance world to point the student toward improvisation. That arena of dance is assumed. It is what we all do at a dance party or in full-bodied sports. It is there for the taking, and in recent years has actually become a dance subject to be studied. Generally, it is called somatic movement, and it requires that the dance student feel their own body's potential, their own body's desires for movement, mood, spatial placement. In other words, it is the dancer confronting their own brain and physical capabilities and composing movement in the milliseconds we name the present. If we compare the best of the two systems, set movement or improvised movement, we as audience may sense the difference. Improvised dance may have an urgency or alertness absent from the phrases of choreography. Choreographed movement may show us movement developments and overall patterns, revealing grander designs and cohesive teamwork. And let it be said that the best of the dancers of choreography bring to their performance of movement, they have danced many, many times, a quality of awareness which is very improvisational. That is, within an overall movement phrase, the body-mind at the height of play and the mastery of formal growth can be found at once. Is that clear what I just said? Because I read it very badly. I could repeat. I can read it badly again. That is, within an overall known movement phrase, the body-mind, at the height of play, and the mastery of formal growth can both be found. Sometimes this is spoken of as inspiration or well, anyway, I think dance that looks, yes? Do you want to? Oh, okay. Okay, fine with me. We're going to project the text in Slovene, apparently. If somebody would like to read it in Slovene, I'd be happy to stop now. Oh, good.
Before you mentioned the clone, the prince, the word, then with the alternative of trying to find your own body language meaning. And then you said that you're afraid it's a dangerous area, and that you're afraid also for the people who go on the other way. So
Oh, it's dangerous both directions. So the question is,
what are the dangers of the other direction? Not the clone, is that
okay, so the clone, let's say, that's a terrible word to use because it has, very strong connotations, but how about the idea of a student or even a school of dance in which nothing is added to what is learned? So this would be this is not something the culture wants to happen, but it's something that has happened in cultural history. So, do you want to know? Do you know where I am? Actually, I'm off the page right now. But in the very writing of this text, I had to confront my own prejudices in these matters. And I realized that the human being begins by copying other human beings. That is, as babies, that's where we start. So there's a kind of, maybe clone isn't the right word, but copying element just to becoming human. And I know that I have felt within my own self many of my relatives and my parents as personality traits that I have that seem to be operating and come to the surface when they want to. It isn't like I suddenly draw on the strength of my Uncle Roy, but instead he comes up, he just appears, and I suddenly realize, oh yeah, that's where I got that, that's how I am acting right now, is as him, or as my mother, or as my father, or my brother. Obvious, and friends, strong friends, the same thing. So, but what seems to be rare, since I came from a generation, the Judson dancers and the 60s, and with a heritage of, in the arts of Cunningham and the modern dancers, each of whom developed their own art form as much as they could, developing a technique and making their own choreography and starting off in a way to reproduce what centuries of ballet had achieved. To do it, as one, starting from now, I'm going to become my own dance world. I have felt a lessening of energy over the decades. Especially, I thought the 70s were appalling in terms of personal initiative. I don't know what's happening now. One of the problems of writing such an idea for a bunch of people whom I don't know, the idea of a dance world, I don't know what's happening because I'm not in it. I live outside it. So it's, who knows what how what I'm saying relates. I'm just saying that there seem to be periods, maybe like Paris in the 20s, when creativity was high and appreciated, like New York in the 60s. You could be creative without even having any material. You could be I mean, artists are still running, who work almost in a vacuum, have little material to present. And in general, the way the world seems to be going sort of more and more right, politically right, which seems to be a kind of dead area in terms of creativity, as far as I can see. All of this leads me to bring this up. I have an old friend in England. She was in education. She said she's no longer able to write, but if she could, she would write a letter to the young people of England, apologizing to them for the fact that the idea of the imagination and the development of the imagination has been eliminated from their education. She wanted to write a letter of apology, in a way from the past and in a way to the present and the future. And I just guess it's a good idea to keep the idea of imagination and initiative alive, to not let the fact that it doesn't have its own institutions stop us from thinking about it and figuring out how to work with it. Okay, I got down to where what I wrote there about the mixture of the improvisational and the choreographed is taken directly from an image I have in my brain of Margot Fontaine coming on stage, doing Sleeping Beauty or something, arriving on stage. And this woman's dance, which she had probably done 500, 1,000 times, the same steps and to the same music in the same costume, in the same ballet company. It was like as fresh as dew. It was unbelievably fresh. An illusion, was she just a very skillful artist? She wasn't a very skillful dancer. I mean, technique left her in the dust a long time ago. She was okay, but the performance, the personality, what she gave was what I want to see in improvisational dances, which I often don't see there. So that's the mystery to me, how all of this works. I assume this is what both aspects of dance are looking for. The improviser must compose, or composition will occur through the passing of time without intelligence. The choreographer desires that the movement given to the dancer will come to life. It is up to the dancer to learn to be docile and obedient in class, and yet not yield their very awareness of self to the system. It is up to the dancer to realize that improvisation may yield awareness outside the system they study, but finally not outside the habits and basic movement state they are in. For the improviser, formal technical training is the answer to the problem of self and movement habit. For the technical dancer, improvisation will suggest alternatives to the repetitions they exercise. When I was a technical dancer, and others in my technical classes decided to start making dances and examine movement anew, one of the things we noticed is that we couldn't stop pointing our toes. We did learn to stop pointing our toes, but it had to be unlearned in the same way that it had to have been learned at first. What does that mean? That you can't think the word dance without your foot either going boing or boing? What is it that we have done to our mind when the body falls into a system? And not that that's such a terrible thing, but what does it mean in terms of ever finding our way out of that system? My own path was both of these directions. I was a country boy born in a desert far from cultural centers. When I came to New York City to dance, I had no idea of a dance world, only classes. I began with modern dance, with some ballet also, and gravitated toward the most radical choreographer of that day, Merce Cunningham. Studying with him and performing in his company taught me complete and willing subservience. Do you know what that means? Slavery, maybe, is another. willing slavery to this system of choreography and thought, and willing, very important idea, but really I was there to serve. Not only did I do as I was told, but I actively tried to do it better. Repeating dances was not repeating a formula, but an opportunity to get even further into the movement and into the mind which was developing. It resembled a mystical study in which the goal is unknowable because it is to do with the development of the student beyond what they can know about themselves, which study is to be guided by a master in whom the student places complete trust. So I was lucky that I got a teacher and a choreographer who I could trust that way, and whose work I was really interested in. I felt like we were really having an adventure in making work. And, well, the Cunningham Company grew larger and more successful, so the dancers were seeing less of the master and more of the administrators, and I decided to leave. I had been given just one piece of advice as a student. I was told to study as many kinds of dance as possible. As it happened, I discovered martial arts and began to study Aikido and Tai Chi. These have many dance-like movement mechanisms, but are guided not so much by aesthetics as by health and defense. At any rate, the contrasts were illuminating, and my horizons expanded a lot. I began to see dance as systems. I realized that the dance world was just one movement world among many. Study of martial arts was useful not for reasons of defense, but because the most important battles we fight are inner ones. Normally, we call them choices. Each choice is a step not only to our conditions, but also to the development of the brain. It used to be thought that the brain developed and finished and then remained unchanged. But with brain scanning techniques we have invented in the past few decades, we have learned that the brain is adaptable. I mean physically adaptable. I mean physically changeable. So the choices we make remain critical. These choices are not just the ones our culture presents to us, but are conscious and unconscious choices we make constantly within ourselves. Culture tends, by its nature, to be conservative, but it is also necessarily adaptive. Much the same can be said of each individual within the culture. Our most basic understanding of the world derives from the active body. Our most basic understanding of dance is the relationship of the consciousness to the active body. For the dancer, the many disciplines relating to dance, such as anatomy, psychology, dance history, the elusive elements of timing, of coloration, of special awareness and deployment, for the dancer, these are all united. Every choice we can imagine is critical to the performances we give, to the brain we develop within the art. Rest assured, no two brains are alike. No two bodies are alike. And I say rest assured, what I want to rest assured is that the idea of the clone is an impossibility, finally, because as much as we try to become alike, we are basically unique and have something unique to offer all the other unique people who come to watch us. So my final question is not about what dancers get from culture, but what cultures get from dancers. A culture is conservative, yet it cannot afford to stop, to stagnate. It also requires change. One element of culture that we depend on is for bodily safety. Taking that further, personal security and even comfort lure us into complacency. And so the culture is dependent upon dancers and also athletes for a vision of what the body essentially can be. For most citizens, the body need develop only to a modest level. But they will notice, after a great dance performance, a bit of extra spring in their steps, mobility in their spines, awareness of their gestures. They will remember great days of play and exploration, of coordination with another person, of long stretches of muscles, of strength and nimbleness, which they may have forgotten in days of sitting in front of a computer or driving their car, or on the sofa in front of the TV. Dance exists as an inspiration against the cultural norms of general passivity that we learn in school, at work. And in behavior in public. When we watch a dancer, our bodies are being stimulated in ways we could not ourselves achieve until we see it and feel it. And here again, this is about the fact that the dancer we watch is not us and is not like us. The body and the brain doing the dancing is different. And there are going to be things there which we have not seen before. But when we see it and feel it, we absorb it. So we are like clones, aren't we, after all? But you see the problem. Unique yet not really alone. Sometimes I feel terribly alone until I realize that most other people feel alone too, and then I feel like, oh, well, then we're all the same. So, I mean, it's that kind of problem. How do you describe it? I don't know. Despite the weight of tradition, culture is aware that not everything is already known. Culture is aware that babies are being born. Culture is worried that babies might not learn about the culture. Culture spends much of its resources and design on ensuring that as many babies as possible survive. I suppose we are those babies. And we have assumed the burden of the weight of tradition. And at the same time, we know that we each invented walking, reaching, playing, communicating in and by ourselves. And this personal space within the cultural space can profitably continue to grow for as long as we remember to grow it. That's that. Is there any young dancer for whom that was mysterious, or any older person who would like to argue with my thesis or whatever? A? Would you like to be dismissed? Are you passively sitting there waiting for? Hold on. So two? Okay, well anyway. How did I start or for myself reach for contact improvisation amidst previous techniques? Yeah, you want to know the technical basis. I was in the late 60s, about 1967, I started improvising in public. I did one short piece on a tour that I took around that was, solo works. I became more and more interested in the problems, which, by the way, if you stick around for the second lecture, the problems are the subject of the next talk. One of the dance companies I was in elected to become an improvisational company. Doing improvisations inside that company, I started to get a glimpse of what contact improvisation is. That is to say, it's also what the tango is, and it's also what wrestling is. It's a touch-based movement form. But touch interested me because I had, at that point, been sort of, was only thinking in terms of dance as a visual transmission. And so in 71, I believe it was, I started exploring with a group of young men. I figured these are the toughest specimens. You know, these are the guys that they were about the age that you send to war or, you know, for very difficult things, so I thought they could survive a dance. And they did, and they enjoyed it. And from that, we continued developing. There were about 17 of us in the New York performance. We spent a couple of weeks together and developed and developed and developed. We spent more time that summer just getting back together and working on it some more. I think it has things, especially in those days when it didn't exist, it was a whole new experience of movement. In the early days also, I ran into a psychologist named Daniel N. Stern. Daniel Stern was studying at Columbia for his PhD. His thesis was to do with the bonding of mothers and babies. So he had made film of mothers and babies at very high speed, so when he played it back, you could see the most subtle movement. Well, you could see a certain level of. It's like a microscopic lens, I suppose. You know, you look through one lens and you see a certain level of smallness, and you get another lens and you get an increased degree of smallness. This was a degree of movement relationship that you can't see. It goes too fast for the human eye. And so he revealed that, and I looked at that and I thought, this is what I'm working on. This is this is the basis of contact improvisation. And when you think about it, of course, the baby has been inside the mother. The mother has been moving the baby's been moving around inside, but the movement relationship is incredibly tight. And it continues when the baby is born. And it continues, I suppose, until they start to grow apart, which is partly the fault of the child wanting to, you know, find the world, and partly the fault of the mother wanting to get rid of the child and get them out into the world so that they aren't, I mean, having children is an incredible job. And so there comes a point at which the charms of babyhood fade, and perhaps at that time the connection is slightly broken. But even so, I wish Daniel Stern had followed the babies that he filmed into their 20s and 30s with their mothers and seen if it still continued at that microscopic level. At any rate, in contact improvisation, I think you're feeling maybe not something quite as microscopic, but something very related to this basic movement, development, human development. Did I answer that? Is that answering the question? Before that, I was an isolated dancer taking technique classes in which I stood by myself and went across the floor by myself, and that was dance. And so it was really interesting to find that I could dance that way with another person. I also very much had liked the early social dances of, you know, waltzing and polka and all of that stuff. So touch had been there for a long time, but not forward in my mind.
As I understand, you kind of fed up to do the self-differential tautological way of the repetition of the dance training. Then you went to the martial arts to train. And then what I can see the difference is this self-repetition tautological dance way of the dance training. It doesn't have the stimulation from outside, but the martial arts has the whole time imagining the contact, touching, attack, so-called, right? So but in a way, training, repetition is the same. The 1,000 times or 10,000, the enormous time, the train to have a kind of the already formed imaginary attack. Then the making form is named kata. You know, kata. Kata is form of the receiving and attack back. And then if I understand, this is very connected with contact improvisation, because contact improvisation always imagine the outside stimulation as by other people, or gravity, or floor, or something.
No, the other person.
The other person.
Yeah, really.
So
That's the base.
How this the connection of this inspiration from the attack from outside, martial art, and dance as entertainment. How you think that dance inspired by the martial arts become the entertainment?
Okay, so the martial art I studied was Aikido. Do you know Aikido?
Yeah.
So you know that its premise is that if you are attacked, you have a means of defense which is not to attack back. That you accept the attack and you maneuver the attack to your advantage. So I thought that was incredible thinking. In the training, so that you can survive the more advanced techniques, you spend a lot of time rolling, falling, learning how to fall, generally toughening your body for some months to enable you to go on training. I mean, this is the same as in dance. You take a lot of classes. Those classes are not necessarily making you a better dancer or even making you a better performer. What they are doing, however, is enabling you to rehearse and take classes. In other words, you can work and work and work and work. It's the same thing. You get tougher through the classes. And you can then endure to find higher degrees of learning, higher levels of learning. But this was the 70s, and so it came immediately after the 60s. And the 60s was, the end of the 60s was a lot about questioning war in the United States. And assuming that we can do without it. I don't know if that's ever been tried, but it's assuming that peace was possible. So I started looking at games and at martial arts, and it just seemed like we were involved with forms in which we were creating losers. I thought, why are we creating losers? I mean, of course we're creating winners as well. You don't have a loser without a winner, but you don't have a winner without a loser. So 50% of the people who engage in these games are losers. And what is this about? I still don't know this, and I haven't found any papers about it, but if anybody does, I would love to know why, what happens to losers. I know what the word connotes. It means somebody who is worthless and useless and no hope and all of that. So half of us, apparently, in one game or martial art or, area, achieve, can I call it loserdom? Loserdom? We become losers. So I don't think evolution does things by chance exactly. So I'm just curious what positive value losing has. I guess that's my first question about Aikido and all the other martial arts, all the games, and most of the aesthetic arts as well. So I wondered if it wasn't possible to make something in which it takes both people to win. So you have not a winner and a loser, but you have, at its best, two winners, co-winners. So that was part of my thinking about contact improvisation. And the other, especially the important influence of Aikido is well, I've forgotten exactly how I was going to phrase that. Aikido depends on the touch. Aikido depends on the lightest of touches to guide the attacker. It depends on something called ki, which we don't have in the West, apparently. I don't know if Europeans and Americans are born with ki or not, or have it naturally and just don't know it. But the idea that there was a force identified in the Orient that we don't even have a word for, at least in English, interested me a lot. That the study of Aikido allowed me to think that the interconnection between the two people engaged could be conducted not in terms of a strong physical reaction, but a light one. I think ki has to do with what we're doing when we reach out our hands to shake hands, or when we point at something. It's directed through these two fingers in Aikido. You direct it. You imagine it going on and on. You don't imagine it stopping. And so it isn't that we don't have it, it's just that we haven't identified it as a force. We just call it pointing. Pointing is so interesting because pointing is an action that we do which is partly physical and partly imaginary. So I have an imaginary extension on my finger which you can all read perfectly well, and you know who you are. You can all read it and you know where that pointer is going. And isn't that bizarre? Isn't that strange? Aikido is a martial art. However, contact improvisation is just the opposite. So in Aikido and in most martial arts, Tai Chi, the point is to hide your center from the attacker, the center being the place that they want to occupy. So the fist, the attacker, let's say this is the attacker, let's say this is the Aikidoist. The attacker wants to occupy the space. The attacker wants to occupy the space that the Aikidoist is in. So the Aikidoist maintains the space with a little movement, lets the attack go by. It's it's almost a provocation. If somebody's going to attack me, I have to give them a target so I know where they're going to hit. And as they hit me, or as they attack me, I then just extend them. if you attack and you want to occupy the space that somebody's in, or insert a knife into the space that they occupy, or hit them over the head in the space that they occupy, that means that you have extended your mass toward their mass, and you are therefore vulnerable. The very act of attacking makes you vulnerable to the mind of Aikido. Also the mind of Tai Chi. So, I wanted to make something in which the connection between the two people was not conceived of as attack, was conceived of as communication. And so that's what happened with contact improvisation. Another.
I have a question about the slowness. I think in one interview you said so my question is about slowness. I guess in one interview you were speaking about that out of your slowness you invented 2 techniques. And I would like to hear more about what slowness means for you and how could you enable it for yourself. Or just a bit more about the idea of being slow.
Maybe I should add one other thing. Out of my emptiness, I invented most of my choreography. So let me talk about the emptiness first. It was my idea, if I was going to make new work, that nothing I currently had in my head was useful. And so I would have to get some new material into my head to make new work. And I called that the empty place, and I would keep it empty as long as I could, try to defend its emptiness until something got in there and wouldn't get out. And the first such discipline, the first such piece that I did was walking. So I spent 10 years studying and choreographing walking. Out of that, when I stopped, came contact improvisation. So is 10 years slow enough? Out of that came contact improvisation. After about 10 years of that, I decided it was time to change and I was going to go on to something else. So it's that kind of slowness. In other words, it did not take, I did study as many movement forms as I could. I studied hard at certain moments, but the developments just were developments. Just you put experiences and experiences and experiences, 10,000 hours of experiences together, and you maybe have one idea and you take that next step and begin that path. So that kind of thing. That's my slowness. I'm getting slower, and I know that because even less productive, but I keep hoping that it's at least a fresh slowness and active emptiness. Maybe we should stop. I think it's probably very late. So, thanks a lot.